Last month, we read and studied Ephesians 6:12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. So are our interpersonal struggles just conflicts with other people, or are they always acts of spiritual warfare in disguise? That was a fascinating episode in ABJ 2158 not long ago, about a month ago. And we're back to a very similar topic in this perceptive question from an anonymous listener. Hello, Pastor John. I've been wrestling with a question that's been difficult to find clarity on and is deeply personal to me right now. In 1 Thessalonians 2:18, which is the text we just read together in our Bible reading, Paul talks about his desire to visit the Thessalonians, but being hindered by Satan. That passage made me think of another moment in Acts 16, verses 6-8, where Paul and his companions are prevented from entering the province of Asia by the Spirit of Jesus. My question is, how do you distinguish between being hindered by Jesus versus being hindered by Satan, or does it even matter? I can't help but want to make a distinction between the two, especially considering that Paul dealt with both kinds of hindrances. What were the signs or marks that helped him make that distinction? It's especially challenging for me because I'm currently facing a situation where I'm feeling hindered or blocked, and I don't know whether it's from God or from the enemy. My instinct is to seek clarity on whether God is sovereignly redirecting me for a good purpose or if spiritual opposition is trying to derail me. I would appreciate your wisdom on how to navigate these moments and how to discern God's will in the face of spiritual opposition. Thank you.
Well, that question takes us into one of the deepest mysteries of providence. And that's a good place for us to go because we need clarity on how to interpret the circumstances of our lives and the application of Scripture to the decisions we have to make in front of us. The reality we're dealing with here in regard to the mystery of providence is that all events, all of them in the world of every kind, are ultimately owing to the will of God. That's the main reality. The sovereign will of God. Ephesians 1:11, God works all things according to the counsel of his will. So the first answer to the question about whether God or Satan is hindering is there is no circumstance in your life where God's governance is not decisive. It's always decisive. God has many different ways of seeing to it that things happen or don't happen, but whether something happens or doesn't happen is ultimately in God's hands. That's the first thing we need to nail down. Now, what about Satan? Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 2:18, he pointed this out, that he was hindered from coming to them by Satan. So when we put this fact together with the fact that other fact that I just defended from Ephesians 1:11, namely that God works all things according to the counsel of his will, the implication is that in permitting Satan to hinder Paul, God accomplishes his will, even though Satan is more the immediate actor in hindering Paul. God is ultimate, Satan is secondary. Now, I just used the word permit in permitting Satan to hinder Paul. When we use the word permit in relation to God, we need to remember that God knows ahead of time what this permission is going to bring about. And so, since God does nothing aimlessly, pointlessly, therefore, his permission is always a plan, a design. He knows what's coming. If he permits it, it's designed, it's planned. It has a purpose. He's accomplishing his ultimate will by his permitting Satan to do Satan's sinful will. Now, clearly, Satan does things that break God's law. Thou shalt not lie is God's law, and Satan by nature is a liar. Yeah. That's what he does for a living. He's a deceiver. He breaks the 8th commandment every day, every hour. So he's always contradicting the revealed will of God in what he does. That's why we distinguish between the revealed will of God, the moral will of God, like the Ten Commandments, and the sovereign will of God. Satan breaks the one every day. Satan never breaks the other. The sovereign will of God is always done. So let's take Judas as an example. What force brought about Judas's betrayal of Jesus? John 13:2 says, Satan put it in the heart of Judas to betray him. Luke 22:3 says, Satan entered into Judas, and he went away and conferred with the chief priests. On the other hand, John 17:12 says that Judas was not kept back from the betrayal by Jesus. Jesus didn't stop him from betraying, quote, so that the scripture might be fulfilled. And in Acts 1:16, Peter says the scripture had to be fulfilled concerning Judas. Who fulfills the scripture? God does. Jeremiah 1:12 says, I am watching over, this God talking, I am watching over my word to perform it. God does his word. God sees to it that scripture happens. In the case of Judas, he sees to it that scriptures are fulfilled, including the betrayal by Judas. So, on the one hand, Satan is moving Judas toward betrayal, and on the other hand, God is superintending these things so that scripture is fulfilled and Jesus is betrayed. Just like it says in Acts 4:28, that all the actors surrounding the arrest and trial and murder of Jesus, Herod, Pilate, Gentiles, Israel, all of them, quote, did what God's hand and plan predestined to take place. So we can paraphrase the words of Genesis 50, verse 20, Satan meant it for evil. God meant it for good, indeed our salvation. And we can add to that Judas himself made the decision and was responsible for it, because it says in Matthew 27:4, I have sinned, betraying innocent blood. So, what force brought about Judas's betrayal? Answer, Satan, Judas, God. And God's purpose, his saving purpose, in fact, for us, was decisive. God's sovereign will is always decisive, even though there are other actors in the process of seeing to it that it comes to pass. In fact, I think we can generalize and say on the basis of the totality of Scripture that in every temptation we face and every trial that we endure, both Satan and God are active, and they have opposite designs, opposite purposes. God is always proving your faith and your obedience in every temptation and trial, and Satan is always seeking to destroy your faith and undermine your obedience in every temptation and trial. Now, what light does all that shed on our friend's question about the hindrance that has risen in his life? So his life, I presume, is going along in a certain direction, and something has happened now in his life, and it looks like this could really throw him off from accomplishing what he thought he was going to do, and he's not sure, is it from God or not? He says, my instinct is to seek clarity on whether God is sovereignly redirecting me for a good purpose, or if spiritual opposition is trying to derail me. That's a really good question. We need to read providence at that point in our lives so that we know whether to resist or not. So here's what you can know for sure. In this moment of hindrance in your life's direction, Satan is aiming at your unbelief and your sin, and God is aiming at your faith and your holiness. That's what you can know for sure. You can know that with absolute certainty, because that's what is revealed in the Bible. Satan is a tempter and a liar, Revelation 12:9, and God revealed to us My will for you is your sanctification. 1 Thessalonians 4:3. So here's what I would do. I would renounce Satan in every sinful reality that may have contributed to this hindrance. You just have to look and see what sinfulness contributed to this hindrance. Wherever you see sin in yourself or in others, renounce it. Turn away from it. Don't let it have decisive influence on your decision. Then I would face the decision before you. Should I accept this hindrance as from Satan or from God? Should I try to overcome it or should I yield to it? And to answer that, I would take into account my gifts, my abilities. I would take into account the opportunities that lie before me in both of these forks in the road. I would take into account my persistent holy desires. Which direction has God prompted me by the Spirit to want deeply and persistently? And I would take into account potential fruit that could come from either of these paths. And I would saturate all of those factors with biblical principles and with prayer for God's help while I listen to the godly counsel of other people. And I believe if you do those things, God will make it plain whether you should embrace the hindrance or overcome it.
All events, all of them in this world, down to the disruptions in our lives brought about by Satan, all of them are ultimately owing to the sovereign will of God. That's very good. Thank you, Pastor John, for that clarity. And in the midst of all our questions about the devil, some questions left unanswered in the Bible, and some questions that are answered in the Bible, like, is Satan real? Is he powerful? Where did he come from? How did he first sin? How did he first fall? Is he limited? Can he devour true Christians? Can he make us physically sick? How do we fight him? You can survey the archive of all of the different angles that we've covered here in the past by flipping through the Ask Pastor John book if you have a copy handy on pages 331 to 353, and you can see the ground that's been covered. And thanks for joining us today. If you have a question to ask Pastor John, find a link to email us and even find our complete episode archive at AskPastorJohn.com. Every episode with audio and full transcripts available for you. Well, does God condemn nations today for national sins? A couple of places in our recent Bible readings in the Gospel of Luke seem to say, yes, he still does something like this, even in the age of Christ and the age of the gospel. We'll ask Pastor John next time to explain. I'm Tony Reinke. We'll see you on Thursday.